Yeah, welcome today. We have a special guest, Werner Skalla, who is a colleague of mine teaching languages, and we have a couple of things in common and bonded over these. And today we just wanted to have a little chat, and hopefully you will find some interesting bits and pieces in our conversation. And we also hope to learn from each other and get a little different perspective on learning and teaching languages. So let's jump right in, and I leave the introduction to Werner himself. Actually, Werner would be the proper German pronunciation. Werner, who are you and what are you doing? In a few lines.
Thank you very much, Michael. I'm a publisher. I make online video courses and textbooks for learning languages. And these courses are always based on coherent stories so that it's not so boring for students to learn a language. My name is actually perfect for teaching German because you have this vocalized R. So I always tell people whenever they can pronounce my first name, then their German is becoming really good. So that's a bit of a competitive advantage that I have here. But yeah, I grew up in the Bavarian forest. That's an area in the south of Germany that has a border to the Czech Republic. And that has also shaped me a little bit because the border is only 4 kilometers away here. And I learned Czech when I was a teenager, well, I was around 18, 20 years old. And that has been a very interesting experience because it's a very different language than what you usually learn in school. And yeah, that's, I think, the most important things about me.
Good. So let me ask you right away, how many languages do you speak or understand?
Well, I speak 5 languages. I understand a little bit more. Well, 5 languages includes my native tongue, which is German. And then I speak English, French, Czech, and Norwegian. When you speak Norwegian, you also understand Swedish and Danish, and at least, well, understand Danish is a little bit, I have to focus. And when you speak Czech, you can also understand a little bit of Slovak. So I understand a bit more than I speak, but just due to the fact that some of these languages are very similar to other languages.
Yeah, I can see that. And you said, oh, actually, let me ask you, how was your experience of learning Czech? Because I studied Polish for roughly 2 years, and it was quite an experience, and it's very similar to Czech.
Yes, I can
So I'm
imagine.
curious how that was for you. How did it go? What drove you? Like, what really kept you going? How long did it take you? And what were the biggest struggle?
What drove me was actually music. I had teachers at the local music school who all came from the Czech Republic, and they introduced me to other musicians across the border because, you know, the closest town here from us is actually closer on the Czech side than on the German side. So there has been a lot of contact in the late 1990s and early 2000s. And whenever I would play music with them, I was always the idiot who didn't understand anything. So just because of me, everything had to be repeated in German or in English. And I found that very annoying. And I was thinking, why am I learning English and French at school when France is a couple of 100 kilometers from here? But I have the Czech Republic right in front of me, and I could use Czech every single day. But I don't speak a word. So I bought a course, which was back then really horrible, like a self-learning with cassettes. You know, the younger people in your audience might not know what that is. Ask your grandparents.
Depends on what country they come from.
Maybe, I don't know. There were 2 things that were particularly difficult. One thing was that the vocabulary had absolutely nothing in common with any other languages. So when you learn English, which is also a Germanic language, it's not so difficult because many of the words sound similar to German. When you learn French, there are many foreign words, Latin words that we also have in the German language, or we have them a little bit similarly. So you have some kind of grasp. But when you learn a Slavic language, I don't know if you had the same with Polish, there are so many words where you have no clue. Is this a noun? Is this an adjective? Is this a verb? What does that mean? I can remember I always mixed up vysoki, which means high, and vidíte, which means you see. So two words that have nothing in common, but they sound a little bit similarly, and that made it very, very difficult for me at the beginning. So that just took a long time. The other thing that was difficult was the pronunciation. They have this z in Czech, which is a sound that, yeah, I'm not sure if it exists in no language in the world. This maybe only Czech people say that, but it is a very rare sound, and of course, as a foreigner, you can't make it. In the end, I had to go to a speech therapist basically to learn it. And that was another revelation, actually, that shaped my language learning a bit, because the speech therapist did what all the Czech teachers had thought was impossible. She taught me how to say it. And
how did she do that?
Quite, how she did it? She explained to me, firstly, how the sounds are actually all like somehow related to each other. So I learned that the t sound and the r sound and the j sound are all formed at the same place in the mouth. And then she would have me make exercises where I have to practice placing the tongue exactly where she wanted it. She would work on my airflow. She would say, okay, now you try to pronounce the t, but you try not to have the air come out. All of these kind of exercises, very hands-on actually. So from the t, she managed to make me say the r, which is like the basically also the Spanish r, or like this r with the tip of the tongue. And from there you can go to the j, and then you have like another set of tricks, like what you do with the lips, and you try to keep the teeth closed while you say the r, and you push your finger here, and you do all these kind of things that were quite funny actually, but yeah, that works. So this has always fascinated me ever since, and also all the other languages that I've been learning and teaching now, that it is actually possible to teach pronunciation at a very basic level, and at a level that really makes people produce the sounds that are necessary, if you know what exactly you have to do, and if you know what, how to practice what you need to say in the end.
Yeah, and she was a Czech speech therapist, right?
Yes, she was a Czech speech therapist. She actually teaches children. So the idea came from one of my music teachers, my saxophone teacher. He was Czech, and he had nothing to do with Czech teaching, because I had asked Czech teachers, what can I do about it? And many of them said, well, either you hear it and you pronounce it correctly, or you don't. I mean, that's a thing that you have, or you don't. And then if you can't say it, well, you can't say it, that's a problem. Then you sound like somebody who is a foreigner. That's just a reality. And that was very disappointing. And at the time, I had a Czech friend who was fluent in German, and he would tease me and ask me, can you say this? Like, he came up with words that have a lot of z, and he would tease me and say, can you pronounce this? Can you pronounce that? It was very cruel, but at the same time, it made me think of a different solution. So I complained to the saxophone teacher, and he said, well, I have no clue what to do, but you know, my son, who was 5 years old, he had the same issue, and he went to the speech therapist. And if you want, I still have her phone number. I can make you an appointment. So that's how that came about. I don't know, maybe in Polish you have the same problem? You have sounds that don't exist?
I didn't care. They have something like...
You ignored it, yeah.
Well, I imitated it as good as I could. People pretended they understood, so I was fine. I didn't have the Ehrgeiz, the motivation to go all native. That's not how I tick. I like the idea, but then you see, of course, it would be lovely if everyone could have a few sessions with a speech therapist for the 2-3 sounds that they might struggle with, right? But then it becomes a financial issue as well. You need to pay for these people usually, unless you have a medical condition, right? So
definitely,
in Czech Republic, it might be affordable for Germans, but imagine you come from India to Germany, and your monthly income is $100 to $200, and simply
and that's just not doable.
Although
that's quite clear. But though I would say it's to a certain degree also our responsibility as language teachers, that we can give people a hint on how they can practice sounds that are difficult, that by experience are difficult in, for example, the German language. Unfortunately, I see this underrated in most language courses. So very often they brush away the problem of pronunciation. They just say, well, you listen and you imitate, and if you don't, then whatever. And I think that's a bit sad.
Yeah, that's not enough. You need feedback, of course. I recently read something by, I think his name was Olle Shell something, written with a K-J-E-L-L. If you enter O-L-L-E and then K-J-E-L-L. He has an interesting approach that a student of mine brought to my attention a couple of times, so I'm looking into this. And he says you shouldn't focus on the details right away. Of course, at one point you want to maybe look at it and improve those, but he said just get an overall feeling for the melody, the zing-zang of the language that will actually help you understand better as well and feel better with the language. But to that, and this approach alone, I would absolutely not recommend. But if you put this in relation of a greater course where you have feedback about how you sound, that's actually the key. Yeah, because you need to hear how you sound at one point as well. It doesn't have to be in the beginning. Yeah,
I agree. It's especially for the intonation, especially for the melody, as you say. I think this is something we should mostly pick up through hearing. You can't really practice this with a book that explains to you here you have to go high and here you have to go low. And I think that's not very realistic. I saw this in Norwegian. They have this weird word intonation, like that they sing in one word, they say Oslo, like it goes down and then up, at least in one central dialect. I think you cannot really teach this. You pick it up, but when it comes to a specific sound that you mess up, then I think it's a craft. It's not an art. It's you need to know, what am I doing wrong?
Yeah.
Otherwise it's and then sometimes it's surprisingly little work, I would say. Sometimes it's surprisingly small things that you explain to somebody and they're like, oh, that was the issue. Oh, okay. If I had known that, then
But what would you say, because you're also teaching German, right? So what would you say are the core areas that, let's say, an English native speaker would have to focus on? And maybe you have some other nationalities in the back of your head as well. So what are the peculiarities of the German pronunciation?
English native speakers, they have, well, the R, which is unfortunately an issue. You can pick any R you want, I would say. I'm not so strict as some of my colleagues here. Pick a Spanish R, pick a French R, tweak it a little bit, it will work. It's like you can't speak German with a French R and it sounds fine. You can't speak it with a Spanish R and it sounds fine if you don't go like Barcelona like 25 times. But you have to learn some R. The American R is really the only one that doesn't work, unfortunately, and that's a tricky one because the R is really an issue. It's not something that you can pick up very easily. But then on the other hand, English native speakers might have the financial means to pay a speech therapist or a teacher who is experienced, or like sometimes it's people who teach acting, by the way, also acting or singing. They know what to do. Then it's the vowels. And within the vowels, I would say, of course, the vowels that don't exist in English, like the U and the Ö and the E. The biggest mistake English speakers often make with the vowels, though, is, in my view, not that the color of the vowel is wrong, but that the quality changes. So in English, you have this you have this thing that you somehow release the tension of a vowel whenever it is a little bit long. In German, we don't do that. When we say like leben, it's like a long E, and it starts as an E and it ends as an E, and it's like le, and like you can make a screenshot of me doing this 1 second, and then poof, it's cut off like with a knife. Whereas an English speaker would say something like leben, she would relax before it goes to the next sound, and that's like the sin that English speakers make.
It's a habit more than a sin, right? So
well, I call it a sin, but it's a bit cruel, isn't it? I shouldn't say that, but it's because you reflect what you have from your own language.
But you know what sin means originally, right? The etymology of it.
No, I don't.
It means missing the target. So
Missing the?
in that sense, missing the target, missing the goal.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
So in that context, it is indeed a sin.
It is in a way, yeah.
Yeah. Question is, what's the target? But yeah, interesting, very lovely. Yeah, I would add the ch as well to it, which takes a little bit of practice as well. Yeah, ich.
Yeah.
Yeah, my name is like yours, Michael.
Yeah, that's also a good one too.
7 billion variants of that. Yeah, so there was a time when I called myself Mike, just to make lives easier.
To make, which is acceptable for the first few lessons, but then in the German course you have to go to Michael too.
Yeah.
But I think the ch sound is one of those sounds that are relatively easy to teach when you know what to make. Yeah. What sound to make in your mouth, and you have to take the time. You have to practice it a couple of times, a couple of days, maybe weeks, but then it's doable. It's not magic.
Yeah, it takes a bit of time and practice, as always.
Yeah,
interesting. And so, how much time or effort would you actually recommend that let's say a beginner of German should invest into working on the pronunciation, from your experience? I'm curious.
Well, not too much, but regularly, I would say. I always tell people, do it when you brush your teeth, when you're in your bathroom, for two reasons. First, you have a mirror, and the mirror is perfect because you can check what you're doing wrong. Like now, the example I'm coming up with is actually from Norwegian, which is a bit stupid, but that's the one that I'm coming up spontaneously. If you want to say the vowel E, which does not exist in the German language, compared to the Ü, which does exist in the German language, you see the position of the lips, right? E, I can see my teeth. Ü, I cannot see my teeth. So this is what you have to practice. This is what you have to look out for. So you can be the one who gives your own feedback if you have a mirror. The other reason is that you can link it to like brushing your teeth, like treating it like this tiny little habit that you do 3, 4, 5 minutes a day, and that's it, or twice a day.
You brush your teeth 5 minutes a day? 5 minutes each time?
3 minutes, but no, it's not so. Maybe exaggerated. My dentist would disagree, I guess, right? But I think you can't overdo it also, because then it's like practicing sports. You will also train muscles. You will grow tired of it, and you shouldn't. Like when you think it's too much, then stop it. But make this nice little habit out of it, and practice it a bit regularly, and especially over time. Like, don't give up after. This is something I see all the time in language courses. You would practice dative endings for months, and then you come back to it on B1, and on B2 you come back to it again, and on C1 you still repeat it because some people still mess it up. So here we are very, very diligent. But when it comes to practicing the h sound, the teachers in school explain it once, make the students repeat it twice, and then it doesn't work. Yeah, okay, whatever, let's move on to something else. That's very sad. So just do it a couple of times, a couple of weeks, a couple of months, if really necessary. Maybe for a sound like the R, this might be necessary. But do it, with a little bit of persistence. And I would actually say do it relatively early, because getting a bad sound out again when you already speak a little bit fluently, it's quite difficult. Getting it right from the beginning, or at least getting it decent from the beginning, doesn't have to be perfect. It will never be perfect. I mean, you can hear that English is not my first language, right? But I hope my English is natural enough so people who listen from the UK, from the US, from New Zealand are not saying, oh my God, what is this? This is horrible. I don't even understand what he's saying, right? So I would say this is something to aim for relatively early on. I don't know, what is your experience with teaching this?
Well, there's different views on that that I read about, and my approach is I focus on the 10 or 12 core issues that English native speakers have. So I have lessons for that in my courses, which are long enough, to distribute it over 3 months. So I don't do everything at once. You do one thing at a time, and then you practice it. And I'm currently working on this other approach where I want to add a little bit more of this melody training to the course, because my course already has that in some way. Yeah, so there is always feedback about how you speak. I do not go into details where to put your tongue and how to do your lips. I do this in these special lessons, but I don't make this as frequent as you say it should be. And I agree, it can actually be done more, and I look into this for sure, because it's nice. What I try to make clear always is, don't go for perfection. You don't have to sound like a native, like you just said. Look at us. If you reach that level of German and people can hear you're not native, who cares? Yeah. Exactly. So I mean, don't stress yourself. Yeah, and but people sometimes get back to me with feedback. We have tools that transcribe what you say, and sometimes that tool simply won't transcribe what you say. Like Tür is one of the words people struggle with, and stuff like that. And this is always very insightful, but that is also when they are in the beginning, and Tür or the umlaut will be explained later. So there's always more you can do on pronunciation. I totally agree, and that's one of my next projects in 2022.
Yeah, that sounds exciting.
More variation. I understand why people struggle, or not sure why teachers struggle with it, but people also have problems sticking to one thing that is a little bit monotonous. It's like in sport, you do a lot of monotonous exercise. In music, a lot of monotony. And this is the art.
That's part of the game. I agree with you that of course you can't do everything at once. You pick one sound and you work on it, or maybe two sounds if you want to go all in, and then you work on these. But you can't do like 20 songs or 12 songs at the same time. I mean, that's and also, as you say, as we discussed before, like it's not necessary to have a completely absolutely perfect pronunciation, but to have a natural pronunciation is something that is absolutely doable, and that people, I believe, should aim for, unless they have the courage to talk with a very, you have I don't know if you ever listened to an interview of by Slavoj Žižek in English. It's hilarious, but it takes courage.
Well, I'm not sure whether he cares that much.
Me, I'm not as courageous, and I would like to have a better pronunciation in any language I learn.
Yeah, speaking of which, so this is strongly related to, I got a couple of questions about this yesterday. When someone goes out and speaks with real people, and they are very often intimidated. And the pronunciation is one thing. They always say, "Oh, I sound like Washok or something." But so, what tips do you have for people to go out into the wild and actually practice their German, in my case, but whatever language they learn? What would you say? How do you overcome this inhibition on this problem?
That's one, also, I would say, of the most underrated barriers to fluency, that people are afraid of speaking, and that this is a normal thing. And just acknowledging this is actually quite a good step, I would say. But we can't leave it there. We can't leave it with a diagnosis. I would say that the key to it is somehow to do something that scares you, but just a little bit. That's what I call the onion principle, because it's a little bit, the fears are layered like in an onion. You have something that scares you really, really much, like giving a talk with 100 German native speakers listening, and this is too much. You can't do that, even if you have studied it maybe for a long time, but you wouldn't dare to do that. It would scare you really a lot. But maybe you're a little bit less scared of talking to a teacher, or even less scared of talking to a German friend, like a German native speaker who you're friends with, or with a group of colleagues who are German, to speak German. Or maybe you're even less scared of speaking to or practicing to speak with other people who are learning German, who are about your same level or a little bit better than you, something like that. And I think this is something you should find out. What is the thing that scares you like really, really, really horribly, that gives you nightmares? And what is something where you can say, yeah, okay, it's a little bit, yeah, I don't feel super comfortable about it, but it's okay. I can push myself to do that. And I think these are the things you should do. And if really everything scares you, then you should talk to yourself. That I would say is also something that's a bit underrated. We can sit at home, just as I always tell people, just as you don't need an audience to practice to play the violin, you can also practice to speak German without anybody listening, because much of what we do in using a language is somehow predictable. We go to a shop, we ask for something, can we pay with a credit card? Can I have that? Is this out of stock? Is predictable. You go to a party, people ask you, where do you come from? What are you doing? How have you been learning German? It's predictable. You can always tell the same story. So this is something that you can somehow prepare at home. You can do that 25 times and tell it to the wall or to your teddy bear. And this, over time, this will give you some confidence. And then you move up in the onion, then you say, okay, maybe I dare to introduce myself in German at the next party when I'm invited. And I say these 2-3 scripts that I had, and maybe then it ends with this, okay, fine. But then you have like the self-confidence that like, hey, I did that for the first time. I didn't dare that 3 weeks ago. Yeah, so this is, I think, something we should also work on a lot as language learners in general, and not just assume that this is, this will go away by itself.
Yeah, no, the problem is, and I totally agree with what you say, and that's exactly how I tackle it in my courses. People speak to themselves. They get feedback from a machine, which is pretty accurate nowadays, because it will write down what you say. Even give the advice to speak in front of a mirror. So you feel like you're talking to someone. It's a bit awkward in the beginning, but this awkwardness is exactly what you need to overcome anyhow if you speak with other people. So it's a good training, and if you feel awkward with yourself, it's a lot easier than with people in public.
That's true. That's a very good advice. I would say the mirror, is something I like. I have to remember that.
Yeah, no, and you see, it's an overload of things you have to do when you speak with someone. It's not just that you want to speak German, you want to be understood, you want to communicate, you want to understand them. There's so many things going on that is simply overwhelming. So you need to tackle this step by step, and you prepare for such an event. Every artist prepares for the show. They just don't. They don't just go on the stage and just perform. They really have put hundreds of hours in preparation, if not thousands, and then they go and click and they work. So if you want, you can work your way up to speaking in front of an audience. I had the image actually when you said that. Why not start with a big room on your own, then 1 person, 2 people, 3 people, until you have 100 people there? That would actually be quite an interesting project, right?
That would be like a challenge to yourself. But very often I hear this, like, just do it, like step out of your comfort zone. And I think this is too shallow. It doesn't work like this. You will be frustrated if you jump too high. If you aim for something that is too difficult, well, it will not work, and you will be frustrated. So this is a bit counterproductive. So I would suggest to find that sweet spot that challenges you, but not too much. Which applies to learning in general. I would say also to choosing your material. You should choose something that is a bit difficult, but not too much, because otherwise you will get frustrated.
And also not too simple. I know it's always the same.
Not too simple. Yeah, of course. If it's the same thing, that if you say, okay, everything is too scary and I will only talk to myself, well, at some point you want to move on. At some point you will have to take the challenge and do something that is a little bit scarier, or hopefully by then less scary than it was before.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah, and I always say, don't rush things. It doesn't matter in the beginning. Honestly, if there's really no real pressure for whatever reason, the first half year, nobody cares whether you speak with people outside or not. If you live in Germany and have to survive and nobody speaks English, you will pick up pretty quickly anyhow. But if you can allow it or allow for it, then just take your time in preparing. Yeah, and then it will still be a little bit bumpy in the beginning, but you at least can already relate to a certain experience and knowledge, and therefore you will improve your pronunciation and your speaking skills exponentially the moment you get out into the wild, if you're prepared well enough. Yeah, so there will always be a learning curve. That's absolutely clear. Yeah, no matter how good you are, but
definitely
don't jump into it. It's these approaches. I started with a company that focused on show and tell, and also make people speak from the first moment. And they do so in a very guided manner, and I do the same. But and thinking of it is not the worst approach. But what users, because I have users, but what students usually think is, oh, I need to be able to speak freely. Yeah, and free speaking, I think I would put that in B2, and not necessarily at the beginning of B2. Until then, it is very limited. You're limited in what you can say and what situations you can actually communicate. That's also the description of B1. Yeah, recurring events and situations. And so just relax, take it easy. You don't have to speak proper German right away.
Absolutely. You can't be too hard on yourself and assume that everything has to be perfect from the beginning and without mistakes. And
but it's also not easy.
Expectation. But that's not easy. Unfortunately, it's not easy. So that's why I believe we have to take these fears and inhibitions. We have to take them seriously. It's not something we can just brush away. It is something that we have to face and we have to tackle, especially for adult learners. Kids are usually more, they're just whatever, I make a mistake, I don't care. But adult learners, for them, it's usually much harder, of course.
Yeah, because they have a self-image already of who they are. And sounding stupid is not anything anyone looks forward to.
So, no, unfortunately,
and you sound a bit stupid when you do your first steps in any
language. You will absolutely make mistakes that, I think it's also unavoidable that at some point you will make a mistake that will make people laugh. It's just, and then what do you do? I suggest to take it also with humor if you can. Like, you made people happy, you made people laugh. That's perfect. People, especially in Germany, like, humor is not like this big thing. So if you made somebody laugh with choosing a wrong word or a wrong ending in German, that's I think that's a plus.
Yeah, if you manage to do so. But the thing is whether you interpret it as laughing with you or laughing about you, right?
Of course, yeah. And that depends very much on, this is why I say, like, it's choose what you dare. And maybe I should add to this for practicing, choose, if possible, of course, choose people you trust, like choose friends, choose a teacher you like, maybe not necessarily the most super competent teacher, but a teacher you like. Because if you make them laugh, they will be laughing with you and not about you. It's quite predictable. And don't push yourself. Like, if the I don't know, the waiter somewhere is rude, don't push yourself to, I now also have to speak German to him. Maybe you should just challenge him on his English if he's rude.
Yesterday I also had a woman who was living here for a year, maybe, or a year and a half, and she was struggling and with speaking or to natives, and then it turned out she chose situations which were not ideal for speaking practice. So if you go into a supermarket where people are super busy, and even though you just have a little question, but it takes you a bit longer to formulate it, they get stressed and they just get annoyed with it because they want to get their work done, and you are just keeping them from not doing that. So it's not necessarily about your German, it's more about the situation. So look for a situation, but what you said, talk to people that are bon volant, that want your best. Maybe speak with people that have learned German themselves, and so non-natives, because they are also a lot more understandable maybe too, but
that can help a lot, actually, also to, we try to organize these virtual language cafes where people meet with others at their level. And I got this idea from a friend in Spain who was learning German, and he attended the German course. and he returned by train together with another student, because by coincidence they lived in the same village. And during the train ride, every time when they went, they would force themselves to only speak German. And I thought this was a funny idea, because what frustrates, obviously, beginners very often is that they might be able to say something, then the German native speaker replies and they understand nothing. But these two guys, they had roughly the same vocabulary. Of course, they were both beginners. They couldn't say anything. So, of course, sometimes it was very difficult for them to even say something. But you could be sure that you would understand each other. So that's, I think, maybe, of course, on the other hand, you will not learn the correct grammar. You will not learn the correct pronunciation. And yeah, so don't do it too much, maybe. But I think it has its place in practicing.
Yeah, I struggled a bit with these, but of course, you know, if you do it within the framework of listening to native German, right?
Yeah,
so you can learn all these things from native sources. The problem is always to find someone that you can have a conversation with for longer than 5 minutes, and then what do you talk about? Okay, initially you can say, just introduce yourselves, give them 5 tasks, and they play around with this. I like the idea of doing this virtually, but it needs to be very well planned. Yeah, and also kind of, there needs to be some sort of evaluation, feedback. I don't know. There's something that doesn't really work with these events. I struggle with that a lot.
You have attended yourself, or you like for other languages?
I've attended. Yeah, no, I've attended it also for German learners to see how it goes. There's plenty of these around here because we have lots of people coming from other countries. I've tried that myself. Conversation groups. I even had a conversation trainer that you paid for yearly, and
what would you say were the issues?
The issues is the connection. The connection. So what is your connection? And if you go to these meetups, your main connection at first, before you find out more, is okay, we both want to learn German. If we are lucky enough to have the same level, that's a good start. But then let's talk about something. Let's say you are interested in soccer, I'm interested in cricket. Yeah, just as an example, but you can take any two topics. It takes some kind of search, and it's almost, you need a dating app for this, and there isn't.
I was just about to say, it's a little bit because you, like in real, you might meet people that you wouldn't want to talk with very much in real life, like real life, I mean, beyond language learning. So unfortunately, that's a bit of the price. So you might also have to look for it a little bit. I mean, these two people that I got the idea from were, of course, very lucky because they knew each other and they were friends, and then, well, of course, then it works. But yeah, otherwise it can be difficult. But I think it's also a little bit of a question of like how many people come to these events. Then eventually you might find somebody where you say, yeah, okay, we click a bit. She is much better than me, but she's willing to put up an effort, and I'm interested in what she has to say, and she's interested in what I have to say, and somehow it works. But I agree, it's a bit complicated. It's a bit difficult.
I like the idea. There is a dating app which way back I played around with. And what I liked about it was actually they have possibly 1,000 questions about your attitude towards almost anything. Yeah. And I found that beautiful. Unfortunately, it's all in English, and I don't recommend using that app for finding someone to learn German because they will certainly not like that. But something like that should be created for exactly this purpose. So you can really ask about your political attitude and this and that. And it can be secret. Nobody has to necessarily know, but you see then a percentage. You kind of are allowing it 80%. And you can also choose, find me someone that is completely contrary to what I say, because that might also spice up things.
Be a challenge, very much.
Or motivate, you know, you can have a hot argument. And what?
Oh yes, when you're like at a higher level, that's perfect. If you're like B1, B2, and you want to argue about something, that's great.
I work on that.
Idea. So
2023 is the year for.
I was just about to say, like, what's your plans for 2022?
2022 is lots of other things, but it's always on my mind.
Let's put it in the pipeline. That sounds really like a great idea.
There's an app, I think it's called the Tandem app. It's a nice guy with a nice team who does that. I think they have a little bit of a very tiny part of what I just said, so maybe take a look at that. But it's really a matter of time as well, how much time you want to invest in this, and you need to balance it with the teaching and the course that you do, if you do one. Yeah,
of course.
Nice, very nice. Yeah. How did you practice your Czech then? You just started talking to the musicians.
I forced my teachers. I forced my music teachers. So I practiced. It was horrible at the time. I mean, that was also something, to be honest, that inspired me later on to make my own textbooks. Because the textbooks were so boring and so badly organized that I really, really struggled, and I would learn the first chapter by heart because I had nothing else to do. It was so complicated, and so it was a bit of a nightmare. But then my teachers, my music teachers, they had encouraged me very much to learn Czech, and then I said, yeah, okay, but now let's try to have the lesson in Czech. So I went to my saxophone teacher and said, yeah, teach me, but teach me in Czech, please. And that worked quite well. Of course, sometimes I wouldn't understand very often at the beginning, but then he could switch to German, so it wasn't a big issue. But I would learn something, and gradually I would pick up more things. And then I also did a student exchange with a high school in Plzeň, like in the west of Czech Republic, which was very hard and very tough because I understood next to nothing. But yeah, gradually, I would say back then there were plenty of opportunities also to use it in real life. Unfortunately, I knew people, well, as we discussed before, who I knew, who I trusted, who would love, but would love with me and not about me. And this helped tremendously. And of course, the access, I mean, it's always a bit difficult when you live in Australia and you want to learn German. But for me, the border was 4 kilometers, so it was very easy to get an opportunity to practice it.
Yeah. So what is your attitude towards people that say, oh, just go to the foreign country where they speak the language you're learning? And at what point in your learning journey should you actually do that, if at all?
Well, at all. Well, at some point, I guess that's the whole point. That's why you're doing it, right? I mean, you're not learning.
There's exceptions.
Not necessarily, but I mean, if I guess most people, when they learn Portuguese, at some point they want to travel to Portugal and talk to the locals in the bar, or read the literature, or whatever is connected to the country. But I would say you should probably have at least something like A2 level, because otherwise people in most countries nowadays will just switch to English. It depends a little bit on where you go. You can go to Russia without anything and just speak 5 words of Russian, and you will learn, but it will be very hard. But if you go to the Netherlands and you want to learn Dutch, people will just switch to English. So I would say something like A2 level, B1 is advisable, because then it's easier for you to force people somehow. You can say, when they switch to English, you can say something like, hey, that's really nice, but I would love to practice my German, my Dutch, my whatever. Would you mind if we keep on like at least for half an hour or something like that? And then you will really benefit from it, because then you're again at this sweet point where it's challenging, but not too challenging. But if you just go and you go to Lisbon and you sit in a cafe and you think that magically you will pick up Portuguese, it would be nice if it worked like this, but it doesn't, unfortunately.
Yeah, I would definitely say at least get B1 done, especially for these reasons, right? And but the main thing is you cannot force anyone to respond to you in German, but they can also not force you to continue in English. So you can continue in German. Might piss people off though. If you have lousy German, I'm not so patient and speak A2 German with me, I will not speak German with you. And at one point I might just say, it depends on the situation, right?
Yeah.
If you talk to random people, they are not your teachers. It's very simple.
Exactly.
Yeah, and they're not obliged to do so. So I totally understand. They want to connect with you, and if they can't connect due to the language barrier, then you have to understand that they simply have a different goal than you have.
Yes, yes.
And
As you said
using
before, like
them
with the
for your language
situation in the
practice without
supermarket,
agreement.
he might want to put the vegetables in the shelves, and he doesn't have time to practice to practice German with you, no. But yeah, I guess you need to find somebody who is willing, and you would say even B1, yeah. So you're quite
yeah. I recommend that if you
yeah.
have the time and if you can. Because you're better prepared. The better you're prepared, and it doesn't mean you have to go to C1 to come here. It's also beneficial once you have a base, once you have fruitful grounds. It makes sense to put a seed into it. If the grounds are hard, you can put the seed on top of it, but it will not grow. So after B1 or the end of B1 is very fruitful. I find that's a very solid point in time to actually dare a little trip. You don't have to move all your things to Germany right away.
Yeah.
But it's a boost.
It's I mean, it was also my experience when I lived in Norway that actually the people who came without any Norwegian, like exchange students who stayed there for a year, they would also leave without any Norwegian. And the ones who had some basic Norwegian, they would become really fluent during this year. And I think it has also something to do, when I think about it, that when you have to rely on English in another country, you will build your own expat bubble. You have your friends who also speak English, and you have the bank that accepts English-speaking customers, and you go to the cinema where they show movies in the original language, and the bookstore where they sell English books. And so you will, like, your whole life, including your job probably, otherwise you wouldn't get that job if they require German. Your whole life is organized around this non-German lifestyle, basically. It's a bubble, and this kills your motivation also. Like, why would you learn German suddenly? It doesn't make any sense. Everything functions in English, even subconsciously. You're like, I've been living here 4 years, I've survived on English, it works well, or it works somehow, at least. It doesn't bother me anymore. Why would I suddenly start getting concerned about dative endings? So yes, I would say it's very helpful to get prepared.
And what do you recommend, like, as you speak of the bubble, the idea came, how do you poke the bubble? So how do you get out of the bubble? What can you do? Let's do 3 things.
No, I would say you have to force yourself to engage into something that will not allow. So you play music and you want it to always go back to, I don't know, a classical orchestra, and there they speak German, like the rehearsals in German, for example. You have to find one, of course, where the conductor will not switch to English just because of you. Or you wanted sports where you find a group that practice together and the instructor speaks German, something like that. So you have to find something that requires you every Wednesday afternoon to use the language, whether you want to or not. Otherwise, I think it's very difficult. So you have to consciously. I think that's also why it's hard. You have to consciously break this bubble. You have to consciously go somewhere where it doesn't work, when it's so much easier after work to just go to the English cinema.
I like that.
I don't have experience with it myself, I must say. I don't know if you have lived in a country where you didn't speak the language. I always somehow tried to learn the language of the country where I lived before, at least to somehow decent level. I don't know if you have ever done that or had to do it.
Yeah, twice, but I did a little bit of preparation, but I wouldn't say that I got much from my Polish lessons beforehand. But I just jumped in, but I'm also a very different kind of learner than the standard learner. And I also have a very good listening skill, which helps a lot, which is also not very common. I'm not a musician, unfortunately.
Listening is always the...
Yeah, but musicians have a different, you hear differently, makes a huge difference. Yeah, and then there is hearing, that's already different, and then there is listening. Learning to listen is also something that is not that easy. Yeah, because you find that out if you talk to people. Not everyone is listening.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I like that you mentioned that people need to, let's say, if you go to a club or an orchestra, you connect with Germans via an interest, via something that you feel actually comfortable in. So you have a base of comfort there. You can relate to that. You have something that connects you, and that makes it a little bit safer. Yeah. If I went to kind of a cosplay event in Leipzig, I have nothing to do with this topic. I would feel like a fraud being there, and how can I connect? Yeah.
And you feel alienated twice because of the subject or the content, or you can't connect to the people. You couldn't, even if everything was in English and then the language on top. So that wouldn't be fruitful at all.
Yeah, what I would like to say, we sell a course that a friend of mine has created because I asked him to do so, and that course is actually helping you to also look at the situation, to realize, oh, I live in a bubble, and to just look at why you live in that bubble. And of course, it's obvious, it's comfort, it's security, safety, right? You feel comfortable there, but just realizing what's holding you back and what could be. That is also very motivating, to just be honest with yourself. What are you doing? And it's still your choice to stay in the bubble. There's no problem with that. Nobody cares other than you. Yeah. But it's nice. Like whenever you cross your comfort zone to a certain extent or approach it, the thing that happens after that is such a beautiful experience. Why would you miss out on that? Yeah. Doesn't mean you have to do it every day. Yeah. Certainly not.
Yeah. That sounds like a great course, I have to say.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's really,
it goes like deeper, it goes deeper than also what we were talking before about, like these fears. It's not just about getting the grammar endings right and pronouncing the ch right, but you also have something in your mind that might hold you back without you even understanding why. So I think that's a great contribution to language learning.
Yeah, it's just looking at things. It's not judging. Yeah, it's because why would you judge something that you do to protect yourself? Course, it makes no sense. But I really love this kind of thinking and approach. So this is also something I focus strongly on in my courses. It is weaved into it, but I also will soon offer coaching in that direction, which will be free of charge, because I don't want to be paid for my work. Yeah, I want to be paid for the courses,
courses, but not for your work.
Not for my one-on-one
sounds like
work.
A great approach. But this is absolutely something that people should look into, I would say.
Yeah, it's so much that happens when you learn a language. But speaking of which, so you've learned several languages, you teach them. Two last questions, I would say, then we wrap it up. So, and they're related. So the first question would be, what would you say is the best method to learn German? And let's stick to German for now, but you can apply that, of course, to any language. And the other question I remember when you respond to this one.
This is good, because I also have issues remembering two things at the same time. Well, I think there is not the best method. I have been looking for that for a very long time. I looked into many methods when I started teaching, and what I found out, I think should be very obvious, but it's not so easy until you see it, is that people are very, very, very different. And the only method that is best is the one that works for you right now. And this is something you have to find out yourself. It's not... I have seen people do the most absurd things in language learning, and they have succeeded, and it's fascinating. And I would never be able to do it. That, like with Czech, for example, I met a girl. She learned Czech, and she looked at, people in German, they're complaining about accusative and dative, and sometimes genitive, and the three genders. But Czech has 7 cases, so they also have vocative, prepositional, prepositive, instrumental. And they have 4 genders, or 3.5, but technically it's 4. And they change everything. Every noun gets changed all the time. It's a nightmare. So much of learning Czech, I guess for Polish it's the same, is just learning these endings by heart, poems. And she looked at that and she said, I'm going to ignore this completely. I will just speak with the basic form of every single noun. I will ignore this completely until I have used Czech. I don't know how long, I don't remember that, maybe a year and a half. And then I will try to start picking it up. And it worked perfectly well for her. If she had asked me before, should I do that? I would have said, oh my God, no, of course not. Your errors will fossilize and you will always make the same mistake over and over again. You will never learn it. But it worked for her. She said otherwise she would have never had the, not the courage, but the patience to learn the language. So she said, I need something that makes me speak right now. And this will sound like nonsense, but I don't care. Okay, if that works for her,
well,
why not?
It's a solid approach, if you ask me. She created a database from which to which she could relate when she did the grammar.
And then she switched the method at some point where she said, okay, now I want to look into the grammar.
Yeah.
So if that's what works for her, then I've seen people like with my own courses. I mean, the idea is always that coherent story that starts very simply, gets more complicated. I want to make that so it doesn't get so super boring and people want to give up just because the textbook is so boring. And I suggest to people, of course, the usual things, to listen to the story and to work with it and to read it out aloud, all these things that you would basically do. But then I met somebody who learned the story by heart because he said that helps him. And I was like, yeah, okay, if it does help you, and in the long run, it turned out it did, why not? But would I recommend that generally to every student, learn the story by heart? No, of course not, because most people, would, me included, would be scared by such an approach. So I think there is really not one method. You have to choose something that works for you. And you might have to be a little bit honest with yourself, though, and you have to stick to a few principles. When I talk about principles, I mean some more general rules that are basically beyond the method, beyond what you really do. Like, for example, that you have to do something. If you want to learn to speak, you will have to speak, and even if it's just with you, and even if it's just in front of the mirror with nobody listening and the door closed and the window closed, but you have to do something. You cannot expect a miracle and study grammar for 15 years and then expect that you will suddenly magically speak. So there are a few of these guiding principles, I would say, but when it comes to a concrete method, you have to find out what works for you. And I don't want to also, I try not to sell my courses as a method, because I believe it has to fit. I mean, I get very good feedback on this idea. For example, with the story, people said I like it and it's really engaged me and so on. But once in a while, I also get somebody who said, you know, I prefer this traditional, hello, my name is, she went to the barbershop and bought something or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, okay, if this is what works for you, then who am I to push my idea of language learning on you, right? So when you're learning, on the other hand, you have to find a little bit of a balance between sticking to a method for a while and never giving it up because you think it works, and you should be honest to yourself, but also don't give it up like if it doesn't give a result from Sunday to Wednesday. So you have to find a balance there. You have to evaluate your own learning style once in a while and see, am I on track, or is this something that I should just drop and choose something else and try something else? But I guess it has to be an experiment that you do on your own, maybe with the help of a teacher, but mostly on your own.
Yeah, I'm initially, when smarterGerman was growing or coming into life, I was also rejecting the idea of a method because I thought it limits everything to one thing. Nowadays, I think differently, because also a method basically just means a potpourri of techniques and approaches, which is what I offer. And it's not, you can have all the tools in the world in your shed. If you don't know how to use them, they're useless. Yeah. Okay. Most people will figure out how a hammer works, but it's also a very simple and crude tool. So language learning needs all kinds of tools. And so nowadays I call smarterGerman a method. And I would say what you are approaching, what you're using is a method. This story-based approach is basically a method, right? But that doesn't mean, like in science, science is nothing fixed. Science is something that continuously evolves and reinvents itself in a way, or questions itself. Any method is something that's malleable, that is evolving, unless you really stick to 1, 2, 3 techniques and don't change anything. But you can see in the likes of Berlitz or in Lingua, and even they allow different methods nowadays in certain courses. But in the past, they just,
or the teacher does it without it being allowed. Because she knows it doesn't work.
It's a very economical approach, but from a didactical point of view, it's just nonsense. It's horrible. I would say these techniques, as you said, I mean, maybe we should say, like, technique is a concrete thing you do, and then method is a set of techniques, and then principle guides which methods or which techniques you choose, and that is somehow an organic approach. So yes, you have to do something, and you have to stick to it for a while. Then you remove maybe certain techniques that you find not helpful, and you still stick to the same method because it's still more or less the same you're doing. But I think also sometimes it might be the right thing to just discard a method completely when you see that this just doesn't work for me at all, and that's also fine. And I'm not hard selling people something I suggest when they find that there is something. By the way, even when to be honest, I mean, there's maybe a sad thing to end. So you said you had another question, but maybe if it's even that you say, okay, I want to give up on that. If you find out at some point that, if you're really, really honest to you, you should learn German because you've been living in Berlin for 7 years, but you would so much more prefer to learn to play the piano, then I guess you should go for the piano. It's a bit sad also to waste your life on something you don't really want. So, I mean, don't give up on the first obstacle that comes. Of course not. It's like in a good relationship, you don't divorce the moment you have a fight. But sometimes it's also, you might also, if you have tried many things and nothing has worked for you, you might also, after a while, after years maybe, you might ask the question whether what you're doing is actually what you want to do. And I think that's also legitimate. Yeah, I totally agree. And yet it might be that for years you have used the wrong approach. There is approaches that only reach to a certain extent. And you cannot know that because you're not an expert teacher or not a learner.
Unless you've tried something else. So you have to try. You should not stick to one thing and do only that. And if it doesn't work, then you give up completely. That would be very sad. So
it's a delicate decision to make, right? Because it's also based on trust. Why would you trust me? You can look at reviews from other learners, of course, but then also the internet is not necessarily a trustworthy place, at least not in my experience. Yeah,
not necessarily, no. Especially reviews is always but I think you do find out after a while. I mean, if I work with your courses and I see after a while, hey, this engages me, this makes me make some progress, then of course, I guess that's natural that you can trust somehow. I would say that's the same for my courses. Also, people try it and see, okay, I like it. We give free previews, and then they say, okay, I like this idea. I think it's not, as a learner, you are much more competent than most teachers want you to be in a way. So sometimes you need feedback from the outside, but more often than not, I would say, you know what works. And when you do something that doesn't work, then it could be that there could be another reason behind it. There could be this reason, for example, that you're too scared to speak and you're not ready to admit it, and therefore you're studying grammar all the time. It's just one example that I'm picking out of the blue. But it might not mean that you're doing something wrong. It's not wrong to study grammar. It's just that your priority is shifting, not because of approaching a wrong technique, but because of your mind. So then we're back to what we discussed earlier about the fears and inhibitions. And I think it's a very important thing to take that up as well.
Yeah, I think the one thing I want to add to this is, so how to say this nicely, there's very few people out there that actually are good at learning languages. And by good, I don't mean biologically, I mean by training. So we learn languages in school for the first time, some people in first class even, that might be a bit better than at my time. But the techniques you use in school are often not sufficient to really get you where you want to go. And they also have a different purpose in school, right? It's more of an academic approach. Again, that might have changed in the last 30 years.
Not so much, unfortunately.
So don't assume just because you speak one language or three, even some people in India speak 5 languages, that you know how to learn a language, because you have learned it unconsciously. And you might unconsciously use the right techniques, but you might also not. There's no guarantee if you haven't learned a language consciously before that you will just pick German up. And I actually get that feedback often enough from especially people from India, not because they're from India, but they speak 5 languages at times, which is mind-blowing. And they say, I speak 5 languages, but how on earth can German be so difficult? And that's simply because there was never any consciousness or much of consciousness there, and that makes a difference. And therefore, it's nice to have an approach and a teacher that guides you, and you have a guidance and a structure that really helps initially. And at one point, you're free to break out of the structure. That's the aim. But so many things to consider. It's such a complex thing, and that's the beauty of it.
It's a complex thing, and that's the beauty of it. Also, I think this is it's like a trip you take, and you have rainy days, and the bus you wanted to take doesn't go because it breaks down, and then you have to find an alternative, and you wanted to stay overnight here, but the pub is closed, and you have to, but then you meet somebody, and it was completely unexpectedly, and you have a very nice talk, and you wouldn't have met this person had the bus departed on this day. And I think language learning is a little bit like that. So it's an organic process where you need structure on one side, but on the other side, you also need to be open and to be prepared for the accidents that happen on the way.
Yeah, I like that. So last question. What are 3 tips you can give any beginning? Let's do 3 for beginning and 3 for advanced learners of German, because this is a German learning channel. But they can, people can use it for any other language. 3 short tips each.
3 short tips, okay, for German. Let me see. So we discussed the pronunciation. I would say pick a few sounds that are difficult for you and make them work. Find somebody to help you. I guess you have it in your courses. I have it in my courses. It's find someone on the internet. The information is out there. It's doable, because that's a very solid foundation. I would say get the verbs right, like the verb endings. This is very important. This is the one grammar item that really will mess up a conversation. If you can't do that, then you will be misunderstood or you will sound very weird. On the other hand, if you get it right, all the other things are, I don't want to say decoration, but at the beginner's level, it's really not important if you get the dative endings right. You don't have to. I will understand what you want to say. I might not even hear, mit dem schönen kleinen Auto, how many M and how many N were there. Ask 100 native speakers in the street if they can write it correctly. I'm betting that 10% will make a mistake. And then find something, some course, some method, some teacher that engages to you, that you look forward to. When you say like, yeah, when I open this book, it makes me happy. When I open this course on my computer, I like it. When I go to that school, I'm looking forward to it. Like Tuesday evening, I'm looking forward to it on Wednesday. Go to schools, talk to the teachers if you want, if you're traditionally want a language course, for example. That's what I would say at the beginner's level. At an advanced level, I think when you're really, really, really advanced, it's not so difficult anymore. I'm not sure. Do you mean advanced by like this A2, B1? Where
B2 is a killer level at times, because the jump between from B1 to B2 is always quite a challenge for most learners.
I would say that. I would maybe not talk so much about C1, people who want to get to C2, but more like to say A2, B1 who want to get to B2 in the long run. Because that is the issue where most people abandon, as you say. And I think one of the reasons is just like purely mathematical. When you start out, you learn 10 new words. Hey, that's infinitely more than you knew last week. And then I give you 10 new words, still double as much as the week before. It's really cool. You see the progress every day. When you're somewhere in the middle and you go from 1,500 words to 1,600, well, that doesn't change much, but you're still not good enough. You're still not at the B2, C1, where you're like, well, I can just use the language without I don't have to. It's not an effort anymore. So you're not there yet, and you don't have this motivational spark of always making progress. So that's really hard. And there I always think of Dante when he said, when you walk through hell, keep walking. So that would be my first and mainly, I would say, most important tip at this point. Get yourself to continuing with German like a little bit. If it's just 5 minutes a day that you squish in at some point where you say, yeah, okay, don't give it up just because it's difficult now and you're not motivated. Stick to it a little bit. Like make this little promise to yourself. Also at that point, I would say that it's time to really brush up both the pronunciation. Let's make this tip number 2, and now make it 1 tip. The pronunciation and the grammar, like consolidate everything you have learned before. Go back to from the beginning and go through it one more time. So you tidy up all the things that you created bad habits with, all the tiny little mistakes that you just accepted. Try to clean them up. And the third one, I think at that level, you definitely need to find somebody to speak to. So that's if you have studied up to then and not spoken to anybody else, then this is definitely the time where you need somebody, a colleague, a friend, a tandem partner, somebody. Because otherwise your fear will become so big that you will never speak, or never, but it will be very difficult for you.
Well, if speaking is your issue, your goal, right? So, but
yes.
It is, even if you don't want to learn to speak, it is beneficial to engage in this. But there's people who really just want to do research in German, or listen to, just be able to understand the German songs. Had someone who looked into Wagner opera, and for whatever reason.
Why not? Yeah. Okay. I mean, this is then a bit of a special approach that I think we can't fit in like 3 general tips because it's a very special situation. But I guess most people, when they learn a language, at some point they want to communicate, both written and oral. But of course, there are people. I mean, I'm working on a Chinese textbook right now, and I don't speak Chinese, unfortunately. So I work with an author, and he says he has many people who want to speak Chinese without writing. I find this very odd, but if that's what you want to do, then
well, have you ever tried to learn?
It's not legitimate. Yeah.
I totally understand that approach. I have a friend who studied 7 to 8 hours of Chinese, of Mandarin, every day for 2 years, and he's possibly, right now he's starting to talk, but he's possibly at B1 level, he would say. And it's not he's pretty smart, speaks 5 languages, but man, but he's a bit older, and you never know what's the reason for struggling. There's also people that take it easier, but it's a pain. That's very clear, to learn Chinese writing. Yeah, but it can be a joy and a hobby if you don't have any rush, by all means. But I'm too old for that.
It depends on your goals, of course, on what you actually want.
I totally agree with all of your points. I would set different priorities at times, and I would add to that simply, and I want to emphasize: get a course, get a structure, and see whether the structure works for you. That's clear. Because
I think that's because nowadays I think many people, I'm maybe coming from this old-fashioned world where you would go and buy the one course that was available because there was nothing else. But nowadays you have 25 apps and small courses and like booklets, learn Chinese in 30 days and all this, and people throw it all around, and it's a complete mess. And they have done a lot, but they have no structure and nothing. And this is a danger nowadays. So get some structure to it. I think this is quite important, like that you have a red thread that goes through the whole through the whole thing.
And be careful with YouTube. YouTube is not a learning platform. You will learn certain things in there. It's very pointed. So if you have a specific issue with a language or a target, you can look it up. It's fine. That's what I do as well, of course. But it doesn't provide any structure, and therefore it shouldn't be used as the main tool. And I always
it's a great
recommend
research tool,
it.
but not the only source for learning languages.
No, YouTube is a marketing platform. It's a commercial platform. Keep that in mind always, and entertaining, of course. And the other thing is really get to know yourself. It's a process that is unique because you cannot express yourself the way you're used to, and therefore you will be kind of confronted with lots of new things and scary things at times, maybe shame, maybe fear, and all these things are just natural, and therefore an opportunity to be with them and explore them deeper. And that's actually something I am deeply interested in, which is why I do the free coaching, because it takes a look at these things, and it's a safe environment to do so. Unless you go out in the wild and speak to 1,000 people right away. But so I like that on top of all the practical tips, of course, I can,
Well, it is true that you get to this is a very personal, very intimate thing, actually. And it is, as this great Czech President Masaryk said after the First World War, kolik řečí mluvíš, tolikrát jsi člověkem, which means as many languages you speak, as often are you a human being. So it's a bit, of course, he was a philosopher, so he said it a bit fluffy, but I think that's absolutely true, and it's a great process to learn a language from that perspective, as you say, as getting to know yourself, actually.
I would disagree. I'm not sure whether it's a translation thing. I would say with every language you develop a different persona. But the human being you are who you are, no matter what you speak, and that's the whole message.
I guess, of course, he's dead now, so we can't ask him anymore what he meant. But but the idea is that you enrich your personality.
Yeah, but of course you don't. But that's me just being analytical. But because a persona, that definitely is. I totally agree. Yeah, because you create a new persona in a different language, obviously. Yeah. Look at bilingual kids; they might even change mimicry and depending
that's
on
very
language.
exciting. Yeah.
But lovely. Werner, thank you very much. Appreciate your time and your input, and lovely to see that we are actually very aligned in our philosophies. And I will add a link to Scapago in the description of this video. I'll also add a link to the Infinite Motivation Training I've been talking about there. Just check out Werner's courses, smarterGerman courses if you like as well. There's always a free trial involved. We offer a 30 days money back guarantee. Do you do that as well?
Yes.
Yeah, yes. Perfect. Yeah, beautiful. So and this is how it should be. Yeah. Why buy the cat in the sack? We say.
German idiom, right?
So take all the time you have to really look into the product before investing that money. And Yeah, thank you for the exchange. Let's see whether
Thank
we
you
can
very
do this
much.
again at one
It has
point.
been,
Yeah, maybe in a
love
live
to.
version where people can ask
been-
questions.
Yes, maybe
Yeah.
when COVID is, I mean, this has been recorded now, the fourth wave in Germany, so we're a bit in a half lockdown, but maybe one day it will be possible also to do it in real life. That would be a pleasure. But it's been very nice to talk to you, Michael.
Same. Yeah, have a wonderful day. Schönen Tag dir noch.
You too. And, thank you.
Yeah, and all of you also have a lovely time learning German or whatever language you want to learn. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and take good care of yourselves. Yeah. Ciao.
Thank you.